I knew it. I had been anticipating it for weeks. My wife, Isabel, grinned across the mahogany conference table. Perhaps months had passed since the whispers began, board members exchanging sly glances and abruptly closing doors for secret meetings. That didn't worry me. My gut told me to brace for what was coming. But as I watched it happen, I still felt the gut punch of betrayal when she said, "You're out." Her voice was smooth, someone else's voice. She performed as if she had rehearsed, leaning back in her chair, lacing her immaculately manicured fingers, as though she had just won a game of chess. And maybe, in her mind, she had. Across the table, from once loyal wife to the now conqueror, I spotted Ryan, my former executive. He sat smugly by her side, his navy blue suit and tie immaculate. Relaxed, just enough to give the impression of ease, while still exuding control. I had shaken that man's hand on his first day. I had helped him develop his leadership skills. Assured him that loyalty and hard work would be rewarded, yet there he was, sitting in the seat that belonged to me. "I apologize, Lucas," Isabel continued, though she didn't look sorry at all. "This is business, not personal." How fitting, considering she had just announced that the man she had been secretly seeing, while still legally married to me, was now the new CEO of the company I built. Despite the stress crackling through the air, I remained seated, maintaining my composure. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an outburst. No frantic begging, no desperate pleading. Instead, I opened the leather portfolio in front of me. Page 391, a small smile played at the corner of my lips. I spoke calmly, smoothly. The board members shifted in their seats, nervous. Those who had supported her trembled, but quickly raised their chins, trying to maintain their facade of confidence. I let the silence stretch, let the tension build. Then, I enunciated each word, with purpose. The company's succession clause mandates that any new CEO must have a minimum of 10 years of executive leadership experience in a technology company. I tilted my head in curiosity. "Ryan, how long have you worked in senior management?" The confidence in his voice wavered. 3 years. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. Across the table, Isabel snapped her gaze toward the board. She had realized, too late, that this wasn't a minor technicality. This was the iceberg beneath the waterline. Matthew, my legal counsel, cleared his throat. "Actually," he said, "we have the authority to change the clause." Her head snapped toward him. "That clause was written into the company's founding documents." Casually, I added, "Changing it would require a unanimous shareholder vote." My smile widened, and as the majority shareholder, I will not be voting for it. The silence shifted, became oppressive, suffocating. Ryan shifted in his chair, looking less like a self-assured CEO and more like a man who had just realized he gambled everything and lost. Isabel, though, wasn't ready to concede. "We'll fight this," she snapped. "The board has already made its decision. If necessary, we'll take this to court." I let out a slow breath. "You can try," I said. "But let me remind you, this clause wasn't something I added last minute." Ryan drummed his fingers against the table, his mind racing, scrambling for an escape route. "We can find a workaround," he muttered, faking a laugh. "We can regain some ground." I turned to the board members, the same individuals I had appointed. I let my gaze linger. Purposefully, several of them looked guilty, weak. I had done my own research. I had my suspicions about the secret meetings. Isabel's lips pressed into a thin line. Ryan tensed. "I have copies." I let that sink in. Copies of every money pitch, every private email, every text discussion that preceded this little coup. Matthew slid a folder across the table. "And then," I said, tapping the cover, "there's this." Ryan's name was on it. A $300,000 transfer through a private consultancy firm, a firm that just so happened to have his name on it. Isabel's face paled. Would you care to explain? I asked. Silence. I let it stretch. I'm ready to overlook this for those of you who were merely misled. I looked directly at Ryan, then Isabel. But for those who actively participated in a fraudulent attempt to take over my company, I let the weight of my words hang in the air. There would be consequences. Matthew leaned forward, his tone firm but polite. For anyone who wishes to disassociate themselves from this regrettable situation, now is the time. Chairs scraped against the floor. One board member whispered, I resign. Isabel's face twisted in rage. You're all cowards, she snarled. I stood. Slowly. Adjusted my cufflinks. They're just smart enough to know when they've lost. Isabel's eyes burned with malice. This isn't over, Lucas, she spat. Her voice trembled with rage as she stormed out. Ryan scurried after her. The remaining board members turned away, guilt weighing on them. I let them sit in their discomfort before finally, I pressed my palms flat against the cold mahogany table. Now, I said, let's discuss why a special board meeting was called, without informing the CEO. An hour later, 3 more board members had resigned. Matthew quietly assigned their replacements. The coup had failed. By the time I returned to my office, the reality of what had transpired settled into my shoulders. My wife had cheated on me. My own wife had tried to take the company I built from the ground up. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the skyline. Matthew knocked gently on the door, 2 cups of coffee in hand. You knew for 3 weeks? He asked, handing me a cup. I took it, nodded. I asked her to study the succession protocols, I murmured. She never realized. I wrote them. Isabel had underestimated me. She might have won this round, but she wouldn't get comfortable. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Matthew slid another folder across my desk. You're going to enjoy this, he said. Inside, financial records that shouldn't have been there. Ryan had been siphoning money, and Isabel had signed off on it. I leaned back in my chair. Matthew nodded. This isn't just the board, he said. This is the SEC. They hadn't just tried to take my company. They had committed financial fraud. I exhaled, slow and measured. Audit everything. Matthew's grin widened. My phone buzzed, a message from Isabel. You may have won this round, but this isn't over. I handed the phone to Matthew. Record everything. He nodded. This is war. I turned back to the skyline. It was always war, and I had been stacking the deck long before they even entered the game. This was a scam. A sudden knock on the door startled me. Maria, Lucas was prodded by an executive assistant who said, I think you need to see this, and handed me her tablet, an email from Isabel Carter already open on the screen. Every employee at Carter Innovations was subject to openness and leadership changes. Moving forward, I could tell she was trying to control the damage without even reading the entire article. She had created a meticulous storyline, portraying me as a tyrant unwilling to change, someone who refused to hear new ideas and had to be ejected for the company's benefit. She was truly a master. I whispered that she was clever since she wasn't, downplaying what had happened. Returning the tablet, I motioned toward the folder on my desk. Matthew snorted in desperation. It's time, he grinned. Let's make the first public strike before noon, so everyone knows precisely who they're dealing with. The business was already aware that I had disclosed all of the illegal transactions. Isabel's direct involvement with the covert consulting firm wasn't just an internal memo, it also implicated public investors. Everyone, including clients and employees, witnessed it. Isabel's meticulously constructed story fell apart. This was now about corruption, not a difference in leadership styles. At precisely 3:47 p.m., I should have anticipated that she wouldn't go down quietly. When security told me Isabel was inside the building, I groaned and got to my feet, realizing, of course, Matthew had let her in. I shook my head, refusing to listen to what she had to say. Knuckles wanted me to handle it. She was waiting for me in the executive lounge when I left my office. She didn't look like her usual poised, easygoing self. "This is a mistake, Lucas," she said, her face taut with rage, her hands clutched at her sides. I crossed my arms. "Is this the part where you tried to rob me of my company? Or the part where you committed fraud?" Her lips pulled together and I couldn't help but laugh briefly. "You don't realize," I reiterated. "Every decision you and Ryan made was wrong." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "You've been so preoccupied with your business plan that you failed to see what was ahead." I tilted my head. "And what was that?" "We're stagnating. The market is changing faster than you're willing to adjust. We should have gone public 2 years ago. We should have grown more aggressively and taken more risks." I watched her, waiting. "You think Ryan was the answer to that?" she countered. "He was willing to push boundaries." I laughed. She recoiled slightly, then shifted tactics. "You're going to regret this." I held her gaze as she apologized, her voice lower now. "You think you've won, Lucas," she said, "but you don't have the board?" I shrugged. "They can want whatever they want. I now have the majority vote, and every intention of making sure you never step foot in this business again." I took a document from my pocket and handed it to her. She scowled. "What is this?" I didn't flinch, watching as her expression darkened. "This isn't over," she muttered. I smirked. "Oh, Isabel," I said, stepping closer. "It's over." Then I turned and walked away. By the end of the day, Isabel's access was revoked. Her security clearance was removed, her emails were shut down, and her name was erased from the company records. She had disappeared overnight. But I knew she wouldn't stop. At 11:23 p.m., sitting in my office, I stared at my phone. Isabel had sent a single message. "You might have won this round, but I'm not done." I exhaled sharply, my fingers tightening around the phone. Then I blocked her number, and I replied with 3 simple words. "Yes, you are."